For this afternoon's News of the Day segment, we will be talking about Malcolm X. Malcolm X was born on May 19th, 1925, and was a very prominent civil rights activist, along with being an influential figure in the American rights movement during the 50s and 60s. He was a very strong advocate for Black empowerment, self-defense, and racial justice. He urged Black Americans to embrace their heritage, reject social injustice, and demanded equality by any means necessary, even if it requires self-defense. He had many famous speeches, one being, "Who taught you to hate yourself?" Quoting, "Who taught you to hate the color of your own skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your own hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your own nose?" This was a very famous speech, and my group will further explain more about him and give you some interesting facts.
Hi, my name is Karina, and my group is doing Malcolm X. Malcolm X, born on May 19th, 1925, was one of the most influential figures of the civil rights movement. His life and work continue to captivate people today due to his controversial stances at the time, where he gained attention from his bold speeches advocating for a revolution. While not directly promoting violence, he encouraged the Black community to stand up to America by standing together in unity. He not only fought against white supremacy and racial discrimination, but sought to empower the Black community. In his message to the grassroots speech, he bluntly stated that there was no such thing as a nonviolent revolution and claimed that they needed to bleed in order to make progress. This was directly in contrast to the nonviolent direct action beliefs of Martin Luther King Jr. Malcolm X's legacy, although not as discussed in classrooms, has raised many important questions and heavily inspired groups such as the Black Panther Party, as stated in an article by Dr. Maurice Pugh. It was his valiant takes that paved the way for the future we have today.
Malcolm X was a strong advocate for taking matters into your own hands. He didn't directly mean that they should use violence, but he thought if violence was the only way to earn their human rights back, then they should do it by any means necessary. In his Ballot or the Bullet speech, he implied how human rights aren't given by any man but God himself. Anyone who tried to take away these human rights should face the consequences of the world. He wasn't just an advocate for African Americans, but for Africans worldwide. On April 19th, 1964, Malcolm departed on a tour to Africa, where he visited many different heads of states and liberation organizations. When he met with them, he wanted to show them that their perception of Afro-Americans shouldn't be any different from Africans, and that the Pan-African nations should take America to face the Court of the United Nations for violating human rights of over 22 million people.
Malcolm X was well known for all his famous speeches. For example, the well-known The Ballad of the Bullet and Message to the Grassroots speeches. Malcolm X was a leader in the civil rights movement and influenced thousands, if not millions, of lives, and still influences us today. Malcolm X was not soft-spoken when he would give out his speeches. He would often give speeches about how people should not allow themselves to be treated this way and to fight back by all means necessary. Which he wouldn't directly tell those to be violent, but if the situation called for it, to not hold back. Malcolm X believed that he couldn't have a peaceful revolution when society was setting him up for failure.
Malcolm X was very passionate about the white race being the common enemy to all people of color. He describes the enemy as being European, blonde, blue-eyed, and white-skinned. This can be seen when looking at the oppressed groups we have studied in class who have been the victims of overt racism, specifically the Native Americans. We've learned about how both Europeans, Christopher Columbus and Hernán Cortés, have both been the cause of settler colonialism, as stated in American Holocaust by David E. Stannard. Another topic Malcolm X was extremely passionate about was loving and being proud of oneself and their own race. He mentioned that one of the keys to freedom was knowledge of self, and that this was the freedom to think for oneself. We previously discussed a song inspired by this Malcolm X quote. The song states, "At exactly which point do you realize that life without knowledge is death in disguise?" As we discussed, Malcolm X was an inspiration for the Black Panther Party, but perhaps not as commonly known was his influence toward the Yellow Power movement. As stated in an excerpt of The Emergence of Yellow Power in America by Amy Uematsu, The Yellow Power movement has developed as a direct outgrowth of the Black Power movement. All in all, Malcolm X was an extremely influential figure who continues to be discussed today for very good reason.
Today we are interviewing students at Cypress College and asking them questions about Malcolm X and his response to Martin Luther King fighting for the Black Lives Matter movement and him being an inspiration to the Black Panthers. Did you know that Malcolm X inspired the Black Panthers to form a group and fight for their equality?
I think I vaguely remember this, but that was like 2 semesters ago when I took ethnic studies.
Okay, so just for some background information, after Malcolm X read his letter, members of the Black Panthers were motivated to fight for their rights.
Got it.
Did you know that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. didn't see eye to eye even though they were fighting for equality for the Black community?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay, for some background information, Malcolm X used wanted to use self-defense to fight for the anti-Black hate, while Martin Luther King Jr. wanted to solve this problem with peace.
Interesting.